And welcome to this edition of the Native News Update on this Monday, May 7th. I'm your host for today's program, Paul DeMain, and many of the stories we read here can also be found at our website at IndianCountryTV.com. And here are some of the news stories for the day. The Oneida Nation Arts Program is sponsoring a cultural exchange between the Oneida Children and Chicago Children's Choir May 12th from 3 to 4 p.m. at the Oneida Civic Center at 2923 Artley Street, Oneida, Wisconsin. The music from our culture program, Oneida Youth Singers, are proudly hosting the Chicago Children's Choir in a cultural exchange workshop and performance. The concert performance is open to the public. Tickets are $2 for adults. Children are free. The Oneida Youth Singers started in 2007 with a grant from the Wisconsin Arts Board to bring together Oneida Indian children between the ages of 7 and 14 to learn about Oneida cultural music and language. The Chicago Children's Choir is a multiracial, multicultural choral music education organization shaping the future by making a difference in the lives of children and youth through musical excellence. On May 12th, the Chicago Children's Choir will learn a traditional Iroquois social song, and the Oneida Youth Singers will learn a world music song from the CCC. Cystic fibrosis is a life-threatening inherited chronic disease that affects the lungs and digestive system. Some 30,000 people in the U.S. live with it, but one Northland young man is trying to beat it, and a 24-year-old Preston Thayer is still a young man with plenty of goals he hopes to attain.
I just want to go to school and get a degree and actually have something to show for it. And I'm sober, I don't drink, and I want to be a positive role model for my community, my Native community.
But the same disease that took his younger brother's life just a year ago is now threatening his own, and he's going to need some help. A doctor's prognosis is giving him only a couple more months to live unless he receives a double lung transplant. While Preston receives treatment in Minneapolis, Minnesota, his friends back in Hayward, Wisconsin are doing all they can to raise money for his procedures. A spaghetti lunch fundraiser called Spaghetti for Lungs and raffle will be held for Preston Thayer on Thursday, May 10th, starting at 11 a.m. at the tribal office in Hayward, Wisconsin. That's the Lakudere tribal office. If you'd like to make a donation of any kind for raffles or finances, call 715-558-8395. And a fund has been set up in Preston's name at LCO FCU. That's the Federal Credit Union account number 2563 at LCO Box 1710, Hayward, Wisconsin, 54843. Your donation is appreciated. Naja is disappointed that coverage of U.S. Senator candidate Elizabeth Warren's claimed Native heritage has resulted in a series of disrespectful headlines and puns that show disregard for Native Americans and our history. A recent article posted by Michelle Malkin with the headline, Sakaja Whiner, Elizabeth Warren in the Press of Olympics, paired partial references to multiple Native American names with ways to ridicule Ms. Warren's ancestry. Claims Miss Malkin wrote, call her Pinocchio Huntus, chief full of lies, running joke, or Sakaja Whiner. Ms. Warren, a Harvard Law School professor, has been forced to respond to reports that she listed herself as a minority professor in that post. She may mean that she's of Cherokee descent. While allegations surrounding her claims are unsettling, making fun of Native names that have history, respect, and honor are worse. The Daily Caller further belittled the names by reposting her piece entitled, initially in connection with the headlines, Sitting Bullshit. That news release from the Native American Journalists Association. And today we visit with Shoshone Bannock correspondent Mark Trahant, who talks about the French and Greek elections that have swung the country back from the Tea Party right to those questioning austerity and cutting government jobs and job creative initiatives the way Republicans in the U.S. have and are attempting to put on us now. Here we go with Mark. Welcome to the Native News Update, Mark. Let's talk politics from the Fort Hall Reservation in Idaho there today. Tell me what's going on from your worldview.
Well, let me back away from Fort Hall and go about as wide a view as possible from here to France and Greece. The elections over the weekend, I think, were huge because it was the first time that voters in several countries sent a really loud and clear message that all of this austerity drive is going too far, that there has to be some sort of balance. And I think it'll send a clear message to politicians throughout Europe and eventually the United States that we've got to be smart about how we cut these programs. We just can't cut when there's such devastating impact on people. In Greece, for example, suicides are just climbing significantly because there's no hope.
Tell me a little bit of the dynamics of France or Greece. What are the politics of the parties? How do they shape up compared to what tends to be a right and left Republican and Democratic Party in the U.S.?
In a way, France is similar. Greece is a different story, but in France, the socialists were elected. It's only the second time in modern French history that the socialists have been elected. The last time was Francois Mitterrand. So it opens up the possibility of a new way of thinking about a lot of government services. In Greece, there are two main parties, a conservative party and a socialist party, and the voters there rejected both of them and opted for a far right and a far left party. And what will be interesting now is you'll have to have new elections in Greece. But what the voters said there was we're rejecting the European imposition of austerity, that it just goes too far. One of the things that I think is really telling is in a lot of southern European countries, youth unemployment is over 50%. And the odds of a young person getting a job are climbing higher and higher.
Those kinds of statistics perhaps only mirror the deep inside of the cities and reservation populations where those kinds of unemployment rates are the similar. In Europe, that seems out of place.
It does.
And so when we're talking about austerity, does the austerity policies of what the Republicans in the United States, are they mirroring what Europe has already gone through? Are they is there something different to those kinds of austerity programs?
No, they're very similar. One of the things that's striking about austerity, both here in the United States and in Europe, is that if you believe they have this leap of faith that somehow the private sector will pick up and start hiring to replace millions of government jobs that are being lost. And there's just no evidence of that. The second part of it is by cutting back on education, you're actually adding to the burden of young people and making it more difficult for them to be the ones to pull out. I think the next country to watch in this regard is England, the United Kingdom. They've been very strict with austerity. Today they announced that they'll continue on with austerity, but I bet first election that changes.
That'll be interesting. How does Obama-Romney fit into that whole notion?
Well, as I put on my Facebook page, that in the debate in the United States, we've had a debate between right and less right. And what I'm really hopeful with the European elections is it'll bring back more of a left argument. And I don't think it's like a bird flying with one wing. It just doesn't work. You need to have both sides of the argument to come up with a solution that'll work. One of the things that I saw this morning was former National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski said on Morning Joe that he thought that one of the hallmarks of a new solution would be fairness. And I think fairness has to be something that we need to get into this campaign on both sides, both Obama and Romney. The Republicans, though, are already doubling down on kind of the austerity elections. They want to take the Defense Department cuts out of social programs and kind of add to the misery index.
Is that doubling down kind of like in Wisconsin here, where we have a Tea Party Republican who we rank 50, by the way, in terms of job loss at the very top, the most jobs lost or the fewest jobs created. Walker claims that his policies are working because the unemployment rate is down in Wisconsin. He's creating jobs. And but at the same time, he ignores the fact that he's been in office 18 months and Obama's been in 3.5 years, without saying that Obama's policies are failures, but his are beginning to work. How does that jive with reality from your point of view?
Well, I kind of would take issue with both sides on that. I don't think any one president or any one governor was responsible for job creation. We've been going through a really transformative cycle in the United States for now about 30 years, and this is part of that long shift. And what it means to me is we've got to get smarter about job creation and start looking for long-term strategies. And all of these are kind of short-term issues.
Oh, in Wisconsin, the private sector is creating jobs, but there's been more larger losses for a net loss in the public sector. That's
Right.
what you were saying. Government.
And that's nationwide as well. I mean, if you look at just the track record of the Obama administration on jobs, it's very, very strong on the private sector side. But where you're seeing the losses across the country is government jobs, whether it be at city, state, federal, or even tribal, is starting to show up.
Let me ask one question. It seemed to me that Obama had a much bigger jobs project program and agenda than the Republicans, especially the Tea Party Republicans, were ever allowed to be passed. Major pieces of his legislation didn't get through, and yet Romney says that Obama's jobs programs is a failure, that it hasn't worked. Right. Can they have it both ways?
Well, they're trying to, and I think this election yesterday, again in France, is a good kind of rallying cry, because what they're saying is you can have growth with austerity, and you can't. If you want to have austerity, you're going to have pain, and it's going to last several years. And I think you need to be honest about that. The idea might be at some point down the road, things will start to grow again. You'll be cultivating a garden, but it's not going to be a pleasant experience. But they're telling voters that if we cut government and cut programs, then suddenly the magic private sector will jump in and make everything better. And that's just not going to happen. And there's no facts to back it up.
Let's reflect on history. Tomorrow there's a primary race in Wisconsin. We have a recall election coming up on June 5th. It's opening up the whole salvo, all ended up on November 4th. The history of voting rights in the United States for American Indians. What do you know about it, and where do we fall today in that process?
Well, for most of the country's history, American Indians were not allowed to vote. Very limited voting started in the 1920s. Some tribes before that, but in terms national, 1924 with the Citizenship Act. And state by state, many states have fought to keep Indians from voting for many years, often based on the idea that they weren't, quote, taxpayers. So the rollback of voting rights that the Republicans have been involved with is not a new thing. It's something they've done before.
Voter IDs,
Right.
Those kinds of things, almost a poll tax kind of a situation where you got to pay for a brand new birth certificate. You got to go get a photo ID. You've got to prove that you're living either on a bench or at a house for a certain amount of time. Students don't have that. All designed to diminish the vote on the opposition side.
Right, which is exactly backwards. We already have one of the lowest voter participation anywhere in the Western world, and we ought to be doing the opposite, getting people to the polls and getting them to register. But this current trend is going the opposite direction. One thing about tomorrow that's going to be interesting to watch is in Indiana, a longtime U.S. Senator Richard Lugar is facing a Tea Party challenge and could be the next Republican to go down in a primary election.
Right. That's interesting. They're still attempting to garnish, but then the likelihood of the Republicans losing that race increase with the move to the right, if I remember right. Mark, thanks for joining with us today. We'll talk to you again soon and keep updated as we move along. If you're a young Native person, what's the balance of power?
I guess I'm not sure the question.
With the balance of power between the Republicans and the Democrats, you've got a tribe that's got 100 members and the Republicans get a win. We need to make them understand that. Is there any simple way to do that quickly?
And this is where it gets complicated. It depends where you live. If you live in Arizona, New Mexico, Wisconsin, it matters a great deal. The 100 votes could make the big difference. You live in Idaho, and you can vote for whoever you want.
Okay. Let's get back to that discussion about balanced power and voting trends in some of those states and why some of those states are real important as the presidential election gets closer.
Will do.
Thanks, Mark.
Okay.
And that is another roundup of news from Indian Country on this edition of the Native News Update. We want to thank you for joining with us, and yes, come back again soon. Miigwech.